So our next speaker is Jen McClure. Jen is a much valued member of the Animal Health Ireland Parasite Control Technical Working Group, and she's going to speak about her findings with liver fluke from her abattoir studies and genetics, I guess.
Yeah. Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for getting up this early to listen to us all talk about bugs and slugs. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about phenotypic and genetic variation in liver fluke infection in cattle. So if I can get, there we go. I'm going to start from the very basics, talking about the bug itself, Fasciola hepatica. It's also the common liver fluke or sheep fluke. Here's a little information about size, where it comes from. They live and feed off the biliary ducts, but damage the liver as they migrate. So this is important for hepatic function in cattle and causes some serious losses. Eggs are passed in the feces, so that's one diagnostic test that we can use. And also they have a fascinating life cycle, and they are zoonotic, which is one of the reasons I'm terribly interested in them. So I modified the CDC life cycle for you a little bit to show where they show up in cows, but whoop, wrong button. Hey, there's the pointer. Okay, so pretty much so, when the cows become infected, they get infected with metasicaria, which they pick up from the grass. But the thing I want to point out the most is the fact that they require this intermediate host as the snail. So that's a very important thing in their life cycle, and one of the things that makes them very different from a lot of the other parasites that you'll see. So keeping that sort of thing in mind, and when they do actually get into the liver, they can cause anemia, inflammation, bottle jaw, cirrhosis, jaundice, and obviously damage to the gallbladder because that's where the adults live. We are, as mentioned in the previous talk, facing some resistance to treatments. And recently, I saw in an article that there's decreased efficacy when vaccinating with other vaccines. Not a fluke vaccine, because we don't have one yet, but when using other vaccines, they found decreased efficacy if the animals were infected with liver fluke. It's an expensive disease. It causes problems. It costs 70 to 90 million in Irish populations each year, and up to 75% of the livers are condemned in our abattoirs. There we go. So this is how ICBF, This is how ICBF gets our data. We've been working with, sorry, I am very bad at this clicker thing. There we go. I want to kick the pointer. Oh, for goodness sake. Okay, stay. It works with the dogs. We'll see if it works with this. Okay, so we're working with Animal Health Ireland in their Beef Health Check program, Meat Industry Ireland below, and I'm with ICBF, the Irish Cattle Breeding Federation. And what happens is we get data in from the abattoirs. The top picture shows you one of the vets using the electronic system where when they check the livers, they can just go click, 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 and tell us what's going on. They take a few cuts in it, make sure they look for live liver flukes, fluke damage, but no live flukes present, or a normal liver. On the bottom, you see the carcasses. Because ICBF is very special that we get all the carcass information from these animals as well. So it's handy because then I can take the infection status of an animal that was seen by a veterinarian, and I know there's something going on in there, and I can then compare it to the carcass characteristics. Okay, there we are. So looking at raw data, this is just, I got all the animals in, I threw them in Excel, I made some pretty graphs, let's see what's going on. And what you can see, okay, that is the pointer, there we are. Beef in red, dairy in blue. We had, in 2015, a fair amount of cows infected with liver fluke. This makes sense because that life cycle, they have more exposure. In heifers, steers, young bulls, and these are with exposure. And the way I'm explaining exposure is they had some damage or live fluke present. So I know that they were exposed because they've got something going on in their livers. And then with active infection, meaning that the veterinarians actually found flukes in their system. And as you can see, we actually get a fair amount of data, and this is only from 2 abattoirs. Working with Beef Health Check, we're going to have more in our system, but this was kind of the pilot program to see, will this work and how does it work? So getting on to more phenotypic stuff, this is in kilograms per day, and the darker bars are the animals that did not have any liver fluke present at all. And the pink bars are the animals where live fluke was the light-colored bars are where live fluke is present. And the main thing I want to point out is you see a decrease, no matter whether they're heifers, steers, or young bulls. So in carcass, kilograms per day, this is average daily gain. So that's going to add up quite a bit. And we're able to calculate this from the carcass weights, get a live weight at slaughter, and figure out what's affecting. Next, looking at age at slaughter. So not only do these animals not gain as well, they take longer. So these farmers are putting in a whole lot of money to make this work, and it's not doing very well for them because if they don't treat for liver fluke, it's going to take them nearly a month longer. Again, this is raw data, a month longer, whether they're dairy animals or beef animals, to grow. And then on top of that, they're not growing as well, so they have to hold on to them longer. So this is more input for the farmer, talking about those economics again. So I got really excited about this. I was like, woohoo, look at all this data, it looks really good. And then the people at my company are a bunch of geneticists, and they said, where are your stats? So then I had to make sure that this is in fact statistically relevant as well. So we then kind of whittled down our data a bit, so using a univariate regression model, BLUE, which is not BLUP. Again, I'm not a geneticist, so I'm hearing these terms and going, okay. But we narrowed down, we used it to estimate for fluke score, and the models were corrected for their contemporary group, which is why we lost so many, within gender, heterosis, recombination loss, and also breed composition. We also corrected age for slaughter with the carcass weights, the carcass conformation, and fat. And we also did age at slaughter was corrected for the carcass weight. So we tried to make this as uniform as a group as possible. So if all animals are the same, and the only thing different within these groups is the fact that they were infected with liver fluke, we even pulled in pedigree data, then this is what happens. So there we go. And not surprisingly, yes, we do definitely see some differences, and we see strong significance in some of them. This is again looking at heifers, steers, and young bulls. The NLFP group means no live fluke present, so these are the animals that either were treated or spontaneously cured, if we believe that happens. And what you can see is while the carcass weight is not as big as we saw in the average daily gains, they still are taking, they still lose weight. So the positive here is comparing the fluke infected to the uninfected. So our uninfected guys weighed, the carcass weighed 1.76 kilograms more. And they also, if you aren't infected with fluke, you take less time to actually get to the abattoir at a correct weight. So not surprising. I apologize for showing very obvious data, but it's good to know it's there and we have statistical significance. Next, I'm going to talk to you about the genetics of liver fluke. ICBF does a lot with genetics, which is why we're so interested in this. And one question that we're going to have to look into a bit deeper and probably have to work with the folks at Chagas with is whether or not it's susceptibility to liver fluke or avoidance. Now, this is a talk on cattle, but I have a picture of a sheep, and that's to remind me that there is a study out there where they were trying to purposefully infect these sheep, and they wanted to know if there was some sort of heritability associated with it. What they found is there wasn't a heritability associated with whether or not the sheep would actually get the disease. It was the fact that they were selecting for picky eaters. The sheep did not want to eat the grass that had the metasicaria on it. So that's something we're going to have to look at. Are we selecting for animals that aren't going to become infected with fluke, or are we selecting for picky eaters? We did an initial study in Ireland looking at 76,000 animals. The idea was to do these contemporary groups, sires using pedigree data. We found sires with at least 10 progeny in at least 2 herds, and also minimal movement, meaning they were homebred, they were born on that farm, they lived on that farm, they were sent to the abattoir on that farm. And what we found is we had a 6% heritability for liver fluke infection for steers. Young bulls were at 5%, and cows were at 2%. Heifers, we didn't really see very much of a heritability thing. And we're trying to tease out now why we're seeing these differences. One reason is, of course, age and more exposure. And so these cows have more of a chance to see more things, which may be why it's lower. But the other thing I came up with this is these are dairy animals. I'm using slaughtered data for dairy animals, so I decided that's not what I want to do. So we're going to start working on beef, but the problem with that is with dairy they use a whole lot of AI in Ireland. So you can get these high numbers of progeny from one sire. In beef, it tends to be a stock bull. That stock bull lives on the farm. So it makes it much harder to compare across the farms because you don't have that sire being used in multiple farms. So we're working on it, but there are a number of caveats involved. There we go. So for our ongoing and future work, as I keep mentioning Beef Health Check, this is a great program that's being put on by Animal Health Ireland. We're adding more abattoirs. Farmers are getting sheets back from their abattoirs that tell them the Fluke status of their animals. So we're getting this information back to the farmers. They're going to be able to see, do I have a problem on my farm? Are things okay? Are things going to be okay? Do we need to treat? Who is getting infected? Oh, they were on this pasture. This is not a very good pasture to be feeding at this time of year. So it's very, very good in that regards. We're also including specific definitions so that every single abattoir uses the exact same definitions in collecting this data. We're adding pneumonia data as well because, hey, it's going down the line anyways, and that'll help us tease out what sort of infections are going on. I'm trying to push collecting of dosing data. This way we can also have kind of a side surveillance to see if we're seeing any of this resistance if we get these animals into the abattoir. We have lots of farmer interactions, as I mentioned, those reports going back to the farmers, telling them what's going on in their herds. We're going to start putting breeding values for susceptibility of fluke once we start getting more data in from all these abattoirs. And then we have the question of whether or not we're going to breed for resistance or resilience. In the last talk, I'm sure you noticed that when the pictures of Europe showed up and they were showing where the flukes are, Ireland was red. There are flukes everywhere. So the question is, do we breed animals that are going to resist infection, or because it's such a problem, do we breed animals that while they're going to be exposed to fluke, they still perform well? So this is one of the questions that I'm very curious about. So in conclusion, still lots of questions. Fluke infection has a strong effect on the carcass weight, and cattle infected with fluke do take longer to reach mature weight, and we have found that genetics can play a role in susceptibility. So at this point, I'd like to acknowledge all the folks in industry that helped with this. And since we are a genetics company, I had to put in a little plug for our next genetic modifications we're working on. So at this point, I have a couple minutes, and I'd be happy to take any questions if anyone has any.
Thank you, Jen. Do we have any questions? We have time for probably one or perhaps two quick questions. Yeah, one here.
Great talk, Christine Navarro, USA. Do you have any data on carcass quality as well as just the weights and how the flukes affect quality?
Yep. We actually get carcass conformation and we get carcass fat. And what we found is there was great data in the raw data. And then when I actually put all my constraints on it and made the population as useful and simple as possible, we didn't see a very strong significance. So I decided, I was like, leave that stuff out. But yes, you do see a reduction in carcass quality as well.
Thank you. Any more questions? Can I just ask one quick chairman's one? Heritability, your current estimate for resistance/resilience to liver fluke?
It's between 2% for cows, 5 and 6% for young bulls and steers.
Thank you. So
And since we have time, I just started tweeting. Would everybody mind if I took a selfie here with everyone behind me? Proving that I did work here. All right, ready? 1, 2, 3. Fantastic. Thank you all.